Devil May Cry is an action-adventure game released in August 2001 for the PlayStation 2. The hack and slash game developed by Capcom was a worldwide success, selling over 3 million copies and is considered one of the greatest games for the PlayStation 2. The game was born as an early prototype for the upcoming Resident Evil game. Director of the project, Hideki Kamiya's goal for the early Resident Evil prototype was to create a fast, stylish combat. This combat system deviated significantly from its predecessors in the survival horror genre, adopting tank controls. Devil May Cry was initially developed as Resident Evil 4, however Capcom rejected Kamiya's pitch of the game due to the concept not aligning with what Resident Evil typically is. So with the treasured ideas of this supposedly Resident Evil game, it was enough to become its own IP, which we now know today as Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry features 4 modes: easy, normal, difficult, and Dante must die. You start the game as protagonist Dante, who is ambushed in his office by a woman named Trish. Dante informs her of his pursuit of hunting down demons after those who killed his mother and brother. Trish's intention to attack Dante in his office was a test to observe his potential to hunt for a demon emperor, Mundus, whom Dante believes murdered his mother and brother. Dante and Trish head to the castle on Mallet Island, where the demon lord Mundus resides. You mostly explore the castle as a hub world in Mallet Island for Dante to discover more about his past regarding who he is, along with encountering bosses, swimming underwater, exploring the underground of the castle and going through mirror portals, all to gain revenge from Mundus for deleting Dante's mother and brother. I enjoyed the game's dark gothic level design and thought Capcom effectively packed a substantial amount of content into a linear space. This was my first playthrough of the game and the video will contain significant spoilers throughout. Recently I've been on a tangent trying out some 6th gen games I was either too young to play or genuinely missed out on due to a lack of interest. The pacing of the story was good, with progression and reward systems segmented into missions, although some missions with extremely short durations felt like fluff to the gameplay. Some cutscenes allude to key elements of puzzles, boss battles and additional content, rewarding the player for exploration, although sometimes I found the puzzles confusing when it came to keeping track of the bridge to progress to the next part. This could be due to my own experience of leaving the game for a while and then returning without knowing the missions, which made it difficult to understand the objective. The controls were relatively intuitive and straightforward. You had movement, attack, jump, action and map. There are also combinations you can unlock and use to enhance the experience of the combat in game, although sometimes I found the combat was a little bit janky and there wasn't much in terms of combinations. Considering the fact that it's a hack and slash game, I just felt it was very narrowly pitched and put forward in terms of what Dante actually does when you are attacking enemies. I thought the music was great, upbeat. It featured a consistent sequence in the music. You know, the more you pursued the castle or the mission, the area, the atmosphere felt. Capcom aced it in terms of just the immersion the player was going through with the music. 1 minute is upbeat when you attack an enemy. And then after that, it's back to what you need to do. Devil May Cry 1 teaches you patience, precision and conviction with your attacks in combat. Some enemies are purposeless to attack, but boss battles require you to master the art of dodging. The game has a way of frustrating you for being hasty in the approach to overcome battles. Health points are rarely left out until you defeat the said boss or enemy. However, even then you're still forced to pull through if you're stranded with a minuscule amount of health points in the final form of a boss battle. The story was simple, however despite its simplicity it does lack substance. Perhaps due to the mission structure and pacing, the game doesn't offer much to remind you of Dante's brother or his mum's origins, where they grew up, or any other details that would allow the player to connect with the protagonist. The voice acting felt cheesy at times as well, for example Mission 3 when you're facing Phantom for the first time.
Surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
I thought it was a little bit lazy. The weapon system is centered around melee attacks such as Alistar, Ifrit Spada, and gun sub-weapons such as your grenade launchers and shotguns. I think it was pretty cool having the two to rotate with each other to fluctuate, because it teaches you to adapt with enemy attacks that you encounter with throughout the castle and also just on the island itself in general. And yes, I'm talking about those ghost enemies with the annoyances that you cannot literally dodge because of the camera. The reward system of the game gives you red orbs. These are obtained by completing missions, defeating enemies, or exploring a stage. Red orbs are used to purchase upgrades, new abilities, and healing for the divinity statues, which is an essential part to making Dante stronger, which I missed out on very late in the game. First time playing, we all, you know what I mean, we all gotta learn. However, the foundation of the game is straightforward. You know, you explore one room, you find a puzzle, explore the next, and navigate your way throughout Mallet Castle. Within each point of progression, you encounter different boss battles, you know, for the first being Phantom. Now, I want to go into depth talking about Phantom and a couple other bosses in this video because I feel like it's essential to my review and retrospective on this game, or considering the fact that I'm playing this for the first time. My first encounter with Phantom was probably the most challenging you could face as a new player. You know, you're simultaneously learning the game's controls. Phantom forced me to be extra strategic with Dante's movement around the map, hiding behind the pillars and rolling it out of dodge attacks. It felt like the Matrix at some point, with Dante slowing down, shooting his double pistols mid-air and using the Helm Breaker, which was really cool. After many retries, I eventually conquered Phantom, thinking this was the most demanding boss battle I've faced in my years of gaming. I think it's hilarious how the first boss you encounter in the game isn't even the enemy itself, it's the camera, and the camera was just, the camera, I have no words to describe that camera. Considering this is a game released in 2001, my expectations weren't as high. As someone rediscovering retro games to study their comparison with modern games, I have a knack for finding aspects that are outdated today, which modern games often overlooks. Regarding combat, I found the button mashing to be tedious after a while. You have options to purchase additional special moves for Alistar, Ifrit, and many more melee attacks. I felt that if the game had more combat combinations to spice up, it would feel less janky for some players. Where this could be improved is potentially Dante having more attacking animations, or the feeling of button mashing being a lot more smoother in terms of just the calibration with the controls and the character itself. I felt like there was some input issues as well with the inventory menu. Sometimes switching weapons, it would play an animation every single time of the said weapon that you'd want to equip, and also the inverted controls when you're navigating the map of Mallet Castle. Now, I don't understand these nuanced decisions when it came to inverting the movement in certain parts of this game, because it felt very specific. And there's a part later on in the game where you're facing Demon Mundus, and it's like a rail shooter-esque, but it's inverted. The whole game, you don't have that experience until the final boss, but that is a subject for later on in this video. I just wanted to back up with my point in terms of just input and controls sometimes feeling a bit janky despite it being intuitive. Now, to delve into the most interesting part of the game, I'd like to speak on Griffon. Facing Griffon was a turning point in my playthrough of the game. Griffon is like a raptor-like bird that controls the wind and lightning. He has laser lightning beams. I don't know how to describe it, but also generates platforms that you can jump on, but as soon as you're on it, you have to dodge and count the timing of that, while he also can sometimes charge towards you if you're off the platform on the ground. The most effective way of breaking him down is to stun it, attack the hole in the chest, which is a weak point for him to take more damage. Awesome, you switch between the gun, sometimes attack with your sword. I found the offensive strategy was simple, you know, keep shooting at his weak point until it's stunned, charge with the sword attacks, and keep going, and, you know, sometimes even switching between Devil Trigger Dante, where it's like a different form. What I stumbled with was recovering defensively. Sometimes Griffon would shoot laser beams charged at me, which would disrupt my timing for the dodge. Sometimes I would inflict damage in the last frame of that attack because of the hitbox. And that's another thing I have to be critical about when it comes to this game. This game has an awful hitbox when it comes to certain bosses. And, you know, I look at Elden Ring, you know, when you're dodging some attacks, the hitbox, it doesn't get in the way. This example was like an early version of that type of game where dodging is integral to melee attacks. The issue was that Dante's hitbox was too large to dodge Griffon. It would cause them to collide marginally when dodging the boss, which would happen again and again and again. I kept failing at dodging Griffon's attacks, which led to numerous deaths, game overs, and retries from my previous save states. It was frustrating to say, at least, because I felt as though it was impossible to dodge anything Griffon projected towards Dante. And at that point, I quit the game. Was it a skill issue? Maybe. I hadn't touched the game for a few weeks and started Star Ocean. I played 6 hours of that and then decided to go back to Devil May Cry because it's against my gamer morals to start a new game after leaving one unfinished. I was a man possessed after I returned to Devil May Cry. It was a moment where I felt everything clicked. I understood the game's playstyle and fundamental ways to master it. I felt like a champion after defeating Griffon eventually, which was a relief that felt like the burden has been taken off my shoulders and I could just conquer and just blitz and finish this game once and for all. Griffon was a prime example of an extremely flawed mechanic that just needed refining ever so slightly. I argue that the camera and the hitbox can sometimes be jarring when it comes to playing Devil May Cry. Deep into the renaissance of my playthrough, I felt my armor was stronger, and later I discovered I could extend my health star by purchasing a life stone from the divine statue. Life would have been slightly easier if I'd done this 5-10 missions ago earlier in the game. Onto this bizarre looking boss that confused the life out of me. I did not know what I was doing for a good moment. Nightmare literally lived up to its name, a pain in the arse. You have to hit the switch on the wall, which I was unaware of at first, and I was wondering why a crap ton of gunk was on the floor, attacking me with no solution and nullifying it. Eventually, after reading some guides, experiencing a light bulb moment, I hit the switch and identified this orb that was floating, attacking it while switching forms with Dante and continued that cycle until it was defeated. The second and third time you encounter Nightmare, it ends up becoming tedious, but the final time, right before you face Demon Mundus, it was nice to face the former bosses from earlier missions the final time. There's not much to highlight except the fact that it felt repetitive, you get the point of it. And the final time you encounter Nightmare is in like mission 20, the showdown with Nightmare before you face Demon Mundus. This boss battle felt harder because the camera wasn't placed in the right spot to ease the player during combat, such as when dodging attacks, which was once again a common issue I faced throughout this game. Midway, the boss Trish intervenes with an attempt to electrocute Dante in effort to disrupt his flow, and on top of that, it felt impossible because of the camera. Deep into my playthrough, I'm doing all these missions, you know, some of my favorite missions. You attack enemies underwater, which is really cool. I have a thing about water levels in games. I don't know why, it's just my thing. I just love water. There were a couple of highlights, you know, a couple of highlights from these missions. I thought it was alright. I thought the pacing was good. That it's relatively short and the game is very straightforward. It serves its purpose and it just does its thing. And after a while, the final boss, Demon Mundus, it was impressive. I really liked the main hall design, which featured an all-white theme with marble floors. It was a neat feature. It felt like a moment where you were facing a calamity. I believe this was a moment where you actually got to connect with Dante and feel the closure he received from that moment by confronting Demon Mundus. Mundus breaks out of his statue and turns into an angel, and the battle begins. The first phase of the boss fight was different from what I expected. It took place in the astral plane. I thought it would resemble a battle against Nello Angelo, which I didn't mention because there's just no point in talking about that, with former changes similar to Nightmare, but that also wasn't the case. As Dante, you were in a winged demonic form, dodging laser beams, orbs, and various attacks from Mundus until Dante's Devil Trigger was fully charged. This allowed you to inflict heavier damage on Demon Mundus and break his shield. But let's pause for a second. Tell me why the developers thought it was a great idea to invert the movement controls with the left analog stick and the D-pad reversed. I was so confused in the midst of this discovery that my calibration skills were out the window after reconfiguring the functionality of both controls. It felt like a bizarre idea to leave during the most crucial point of the game with the final boss. And bearing in mind, I was like, sometimes I was balls deep in the boss. I'd die like with his health, with Mundus's health point low, restart my save state, and I was figuring out, like, I was having to recalibrate the movement controls because they were inverted, thinking, okay, cool, I could do inverted controls, I'm used to that. But it got to the point where it was just a mindfuck. So I went on Reddit to look for, like, you know, just what people felt, you know, their opinions on it, or if there's any like key things I missed out on. And yeah, it turns out that the D-pad is not inverted, but the analog stick is. So again, it's like, who thought this would be a good idea at Capcom? It makes no sense. And the most frustrating point about it was that this is in the most crucial part of the game, the final boss, because once you die and if you have no life stones left, it's like, oh, you gotta go all the way back to the beginning, watch that cutscene all over again, and there you are. And it's just like, it just didn't feel necessary at all. I find inverted controls to be annoying unless it's used to control a camera, like for example in Zelda, or I don't know, Ocarina of Time when you're using a hookshot. Like, that's perfectly, I don't know why, but my brain can compute that. Demon Mundus was like a rail shooter S type of boss. boss where you're dodging attacks that are approaching you while shooting projectiles for him to take damage. It was a challenge and led to many retries, as mentioned earlier. This was probably the second or third most demanding boss I encountered during my playthrough with this game, and this is only the first 4. I thought I was cooked. In the second phase, the boss returns to his human form, equipped with the Devil Sword Spada to deflect attacks. Pretty straightforward. You proceed in the final part of the game where you complete one mission, flee the fallen castle within a limited time, Trish appears again, perish Demon Mundus once and for all, use inverted controls again from the escape sequence, and the game is then over. Devil May Cry is a fundamentally good game. However, the issues I consistently faced were the fixed camera positions, the awful hitbox when dodging attacks, input delay, and janky controls at times, which disrupted the flow state when facing a boss or finding a rhythm during combat. But considering the fact that this is a game from 2001, an early PlayStation 2 title, I'm not gonna begrudge it or knock it off. I'm not gonna hold anything against it. Did it break me? Absolutely. Am I going to play it again one day? Absolutely not. Will I consider playing the sequel? Maybe one day. I think it was an experiment that worked. Capcom were extremely ambitious for Resident Evil 4, but Devil May Cry is extremely flawed. You know what though? I feel like modern games missed that. They took the risk, made something else from a concept that was completely different to from an established IP, and they made it into its own IP, and you got Devil May Cry. You need more of that originality. However, I'm Solarcast. This was my game review of Devil May Cry. If it inspired you to give it a try, I'm pleased. If it refrained you from playing it, I don't blame you. Either way, it's a good game. I love a challenging game. I don't shy away from it. But it's one of those ones where you just have to be patient. Anyways, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. See you later.